It's really an honor for me to be here. I'm Felicia Wong, the new president and CEO of the Roosevelt Institute, which partners with Guildhall in putting on the Hamptons Institute every summer. It is just wonderful to see everybody. It was lovely to be able to chat in the garden. And I'd like to start by thanking so many of the generous people who make this event possible. First, of course, I'd like to thank our lead sponsors, the Chubb Group, their cornerstone agent, Dayton, Ritz, and Osborne, and the Tarr family. I'd also like to thank all of the fellows, many of whom are here today, for their generous and ongoing support of the Hamptons Institute. We also definitely need to thank Mickey Strauss, Ruth Appelhoff, and Tracy Marshall of Guildhall, who worked so hard to put together this really extraordinary production. I know how much work and effort it is to put together this kind of event. Finally, we really need to thank Ellen Chesler, who is a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and no doubt a friend of every single person in this audience, for having done all of the tireless and I hope somewhat fun work of putting together this kind of show. I think you all know that Ellen really knows how to bring together ideas and people in a way that is extraordinarily high impact. So Ellen, thank you so much for working on this event. So before I introduce the panel, let me just say a few things about the Roosevelt Institute. Many of you may know that the Institute's mission is to promote the legacy of Eleanor and Franklin Roosevelt, two of the 20th century's greatest heroes. In so many ways, the Roosevelts made the world that I hope we still live in, but increasingly, that has come under some fire. And so the mission of the Roosevelt Institute is to ensure that the legacy of the Roosevelts is made manifest today. We are really trying to build a new deal for the 21st century. And we're doing that because we are an ideas organization, and so we're doing that through people like Ellen and many of her colleagues. Rob Johnson, Joe Stiglitz, Jeff Madrick. These are really some of the top thinkers on economic and social policy in the United States today, and it's our job to bring them together and to provide a platform to them so that they can really ensure that their ideas are heard by the American people. But we don't just work with the Nobel Prize winners of today, we also work with the Nobel Prize winners of tomorrow. As an ideas organization, we actually help coordinate and organize the thinking of over 10,000 students in something called the Roosevelt Institute Campus Network at 100 schools across college campuses, college and university campuses across the country. This is really we are the largest student policy network in America, and we're extraordinarily proud of that. I can't wait till many of our students are here on stages like this one or winning Nobel Prize in the spirit of progressivism, progressive ideas to the fore, but also many ideas to the fore. And so we're so pleased about the program that you are all seeing, and we are all seeing this weekend. So as part of that, of course, it's my job to introduce today's panel. Today's conversation, I should say. It's with Steve Kroft of 60 Minutes and Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Now, these are two people who need no introduction, but you always say that and then you introduce somebody anyway. It's remarkable to have Steve here interviewing the senator because his incisive investigative reporting and his ability to really interview anybody, including multiple American presidents, makes him of course, earned him many Peabody's and Emmy Awards, but also makes him the perfect person to really engage with the senator deeply on the perilous state of American politics and what we should do as we sit here in 2012 and look out into the future. Of course, Senator Gillibrand has become very well known for her work in the Senate, not only on women's issues, which I think it's fair to say these are things that she honed as a lawyer, both in New York and in Albany. These are issues that she became engaged with, but also the breadth of her work on a number of issues. She has seen some political fights. No doubt she will see many more as she engages in her race this year. And I have to say, the one thing that strikes me about the senator, despite all of her many accomplishments, I was lucky enough to hear her speak in San Francisco, which is where I recently moved from. She talked about many, many issues: gun control, don't ask, don't tell, many things that are critically important. But she also admitted that as a working mom, she occasionally forgets pizza day at school. And I have to say that actually struck a chord with me. I knew that she was a kindred spirit. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Kroft and Kirsten Gillibrand for what I'm sure will be a very fascinating conversation.
I guess I want to begin by asking you, you've been there 4 years now, right? Coming up on 4 years. Mm-hmm. How are you finding this job?
Well, it's an amazing opportunity, I think, to make a difference, and I feel incredibly privileged and grateful that I have the chance to represent our state. But I understand, for all of us, we look at Washington and we know it's broken, and we see so much opportunity passing us by to get things done, and a lack of consensus, a lack of bipartisanship, constant bickering. But I think the way to get things done is to find the core common values that we actually share, and then build a consensus around that. And I've had a few opportunities in the last few years to actually pass legislation, things that matter a lot, like the 9/11 health bill, or repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or the Stock Act, one that you obviously broke the news on. So that's how it's done. I mean, it has to be done with shared values, and it cannot be done any other way. And so a lot of what many of us want to do is try to change the rules, reform Washington, make it more transparent, make it more accountable, because it's so frustrating when you see common sense ideas that are really nonpartisan not be able to pass forward, like tax relief for small businesses, or an infrastructure bank, or a Made in America manufacturing bill. Very, very frustrating.
And why is that, do you think? Why is there so much resistance to the obvious?
I think it's just politics. I think it's election season, and I think too many people are focused on political points, not enough on getting things done. And unfortunately, also, some of the bigger issues about the economy, about tax reform, are being taken off the table because of third parties who think it's more important ever to raise taxes than to actually do your job. And so one of the concerns is you need to have independent-minded people who will do the people's business first, not carry political water.
Do you think, I mean, the reason I asked that question first was because you had two very prominent, reasonable people in the Senate this year, a moderate Republican and a moderate Democrat. I'm talking about Olympia Snowe and Evan Bayh, both at sort of the peak of their careers, saying, I don't want to deal with this anymore. This place doesn't work. It's dysfunctional. It's a waste of my time. Now, this is the U.S. Senate. This is being a U.S. Senator. That's an important job. Explain that to me.
Well, I think with Olympia, who I've gotten to know quite well, it's the most disheartening for me personally. She's an extraordinary woman who always puts what's best for her constituents and her country first. She crosses party lines often. I've heard her tell stories about when she voted against her party, the type of negative reaction she received, and almost being ostracized at times. And I think the burden on her was just so great, she felt that she couldn't do her job anymore. But I can tell you, there's something unique about the women of the Senate that is really meaningful. More often than not, any time I've ever been successful at anything in the Senate is because there's been a woman Republican helping me. And I can tell you, the women of the Senate, we get together regularly, we have quarterly dinners, we get to know each other personally, our personal lives, our priorities, what we care deeply about. And there's always a willingness to find that common ground, build that consensus, and work together. And so one of my long-term ambitions is to get more women engaged in politics. I want more women voting. I want more women holding their elected leaders accountable, more women being advocates on the things they care about, and more women running. Because if we had 51% of women in Congress, do you think we'd be debating contraception almost this whole year? I can assure you we would not. So having that common sense and ability to, again, find common ground is what makes the difference. It's not surprising that it was Susan Collins who was leading the charge on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and then again on the Stock Act. It's not surprising that it was Lisa Murkowski who was going to bat every day, every time she went into her caucus meetings to say, why aren't we standing with our first responders? Why aren't we supporting Kirsten's bill? Because she could see the commonality in what I was trying to do. And so that's one of the things that I think could fix Washington, bringing in more women, because often, and it's not always, but often women want to come to public service to make a difference, to help people, not for self-aggrandizement, not for political power. And I think it makes a difference. And of course, it's not true for all women, but I think more often than not, that's what you see, and it's certainly been my personal experience. And then second is oftentimes when you have two perspectives on solving a problem, a female perspective and a male perspective, the combination of those two perspectives tends to be more powerful, more holistic in its approach. And it bears out in studies when you look at even corporate America, when women are on corporate boards, the returns are higher returns on investment, because they look at risk differently, they look at investments differently, they want a more holistic approach sometimes.
This is the least popular Congress since people began taking public opinion polls on how people felt about Congress. And some people have suggested that the 112th Congress will go down as being the worst in history. It's on track right now to pass the fewest pieces of legislation of any Senate in a half a century. And a lot of the legislation never reaches the floor for a vote or even a debate. Mm-hmm. I know you've touched on it briefly, mm-hmm. but clearly the members in Congress, the members of the Senate, must be aware of their lack of standing with the voters, but yet they seem unwilling to make the steps necessary to try and accomplish something. Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think it depends on the individual senator as to what's motivating them. I know a number of us have been working very hard to find these core common values to build legislation around. One, for example, just a bill to help small businesses. It was written by Olympia Snowe and Mary Landrieu. We asked all the women senators to co-sponsor it. We got 14 out of 17 to write a letter to our leaders saying we want to vote on this bill. And we weren't successful. So there are many people who want to make a difference. There's also structural challenges. We need far more transparency and accountability in Congress, and that's a huge problem when one senator can have an anonymous hold on a bill and you have no idea who it is or why they're holding up the bill. That breaks down the ability to get things done. Having transparency, so you can go to that senator and say, why are you against this bill? What needs to change? What can I do to make this something you're willing to vote on? Also, there's a lot of efforts by many members to change the rules, change the filibuster rules. Why do you need 60 votes just to proceed to a debate? It seems ridiculous. You should be able to proceed to a debate with 51 votes. Why does someone get to filibuster something and not tell people why they're filibustering? Why not we have a Mr. Smith goes to Washington rule that if you want to stop or if you want a prolonged debate, that you actually have to get on the Senate floor and talk about why you don't want to vote on a bill and why it needs more debate. I think that would be a very heightened standard that would make a difference. So those are some of the reform efforts that are going on right now. One of the other challenges, and this is not specific to the slowness of the Senate, but a reform that I think is so necessary, is campaign finance reform. And if you look in this electoral season, which is why I think, to your original question, why is the approval rating of Congress so low? Well, when you have literally millions of dollars being spent all across this country on negative ads, and when you have unlimited spending, it's not for positive ads, it's for negative ads because they work. It makes people look at our institution and say, it's failing, it's broken, it doesn't work, these members of Congress are not accountable to me. And that's what, again, continues to erode people's belief that the government can work for them. And so we need much more disclosure, more transparency in the money being spent. Right now, any company can spend unlimited amounts of money on ads and have no disclosure. So if you have an oil company that doesn't like a green energy candidate and wants to spend $10 million in negative ads, there's no one to tell the voter, well, that's coming from the oil company and they're just upset about this one issue. That's the challenge we are facing, and we have a number of bills to try to change that.
I want to go back and pick up some of the rules and regulations, and at the risk of putting you to sleep, I want you to explain the filibuster and what I understand to be called holds. And I'm going to give you, you can correct me if I'm wrong, because it's one of the reasons why nothing has been done. It used to be that if you wanted to stop a piece of legislation, you had a filibuster. You had to stand on the floor and debate for, days, sometimes weeks they went on. Then it was decided that that was sort of a waste of time. Now, if any member of the Senate there's a bill that comes up, not just a bill, but an executive appointment or a judicial appointment, and if all it takes is for one senator to put a hold on a bill, and it goes nowhere, it's absolutely dead in the water unless he can come up with 60 votes to get it to the floor, right?
Yes.
So in effect, it takes 60 votes
to do anything.
Pass anything in the Senate, and you've got a Senate with 57 Democrats and 43 Republicans, right? So you have this deadlock that exists. Is that essentially correct?
Correct. And, the filibuster was put in place a long time ago because if a senator was in their home state and needed some time to get to the Capitol, they were able to wait for him to arrive so he could actually say what he thought about the bill and have more time for debate. The whole point of filibuster was to allow for more debate, not to stop debate or stop progress. And it used to be used, some estimates, maybe once a year. Under this Congress, in recent history, it's been used as often as once a week. So you can see the metastasizing of the use of these arcane rules to halt progress. And so that's why there's a real effort, particularly among some of the newer members. Tom Udall's focused on it, a number of others and I are focused on it, to change the rules. Let's have a 51 vote margin, that if you want to, and there's other, Senator Harkin had an interesting idea. If the purpose of the filibuster is to allow for more debate, he came up with a proposal, well, if you want to have a 60 vote margin, you have it, and then you get 2 weeks to debate more, and then it goes to 55, and then you get 2 weeks to debate more, and then it goes to 51. So that it gives you 4 extra weeks of debate. Fair enough, if that's really the purpose of it, that seemed reasonable. Any of those reforms, I think, would make a huge difference. And I feel that 51 votes should be enough because you have to stand or fall on your merits. And yes, it puts at risk things that I care very, very deeply about. But if the American people don't know how their elected leaders are voting on this, that means we have to do much more to strengthen our democracy and make sure people are aware of what these elected leaders think and on what they are going to do with their vote.
There is one senator, Tom Coburn of Oklahoma, who placed more than 100 holds on the legislation this year. In 2010, Richard Shelby of Alabama placed 70 holds on presidential appointees in an effort to force the government into granting a $35 billion award to defense contract to Northrop Grumman, which is headquartered in Alabama. And he held up the appointments until the contract, or at least that's what he was trying to do. I can't remember exactly what the outcome was. That sounds to me like extortion.
Yeah.
But this is all legal within the rules of the Senate.
So one development that's interesting that is to what you're talking about. So apparently in the beginning of the last Congress, Majority Leader Reid and Republican Leader McConnell made a gentleman's agreement in terms of what rules they would use going forward. And so as a junior senator, one of my jobs is I have to preside over the Senate for X number of hours a week. So when I typically preside, it's Wednesday morning. So I sit there from the time the Senate opens at 9:30 till noon. And this is when McConnell and Harry Reid had a debate about this issue. And so Harry decided that his view is he wants to change the filibuster rule, and he wants to change it back to 51. And Mitch McConnell was really very concerned about that. And so they had literally this, it's so rare, because I preside this 2.5 hours every week. And so rare, but they went back and forth for almost an hour about this issue. And Mitch McConnell basically said, you know, I wonder if Majority Leader Reid understands that if we win the Senate, that Obamacare will be at risk because we will only need 51 votes and we will unwind it. And so there was this real debate about, do you really want to have this rule if you're in the minority? And Harry says, yes. He said, I do, because if you can't even proceed to a bill unless you have 60 votes, we can't get the people's business done. And I think he's particularly frustrated. Now, what the Republican leader said in response is he's frustrated because he just wants more amendments. He wants to be able to have unlimited amendments on any bill. And in many of the pieces of legislation we've been voting on successfully, we did do that. So when we did the Stock Act, we let unlimited amendments come in. And a lot of them were germane and a lot of them were really crazy, but fair enough, let them stand or fall on their merits. And so I think more amendments is a good thing. One of the reform bills I'm working on with this group of senators would have unlimited amendments, and that would address the minority's worry.
I mentioned Senator Shelby, who's a Republican. Also, there are people in the Democrats in the Senate who have placed holds on bills that have come over from the House, right?
I'm sure, yeah.
Right. That were passed by the Republican majority over there. So it is a bipartisan problem and procedure. Now, my question is that these rules have been in place for a long time. Mm-hmm. The filibuster, I think, started in the 19th century, the first part of the 19th century. That maybe some people had said that it started with Aaron Burr, but I'm not exactly sure of the exact history. But my point is, it's worked pretty well for a long time. Mm. And the theory has always been, and the academics will say, the Senate was devised to be the more deliberative body. It's not supposed to rubber stamp the House. It's supposed to be difficult to get things through the Senate, mm-hmm. to keep the people that get elected every 2 years from ramming through bills based on the political flavor of that election cycle. And I guess my question is the problem the Senate and the rules, or is it the problem the senators and the congressmen that we have elected, and is this just one more reflection of the divisiveness that exists in the country right now?
I think it is a reflection of the divisiveness in the country right now. And we have been productive under these rules before. And in fact, just one measurable, which I know a lot of New Yorkers care about, is judges. We care a lot about our judiciary. We care a lot about making sure our circuit court judges, district court judges are able to manage their caseload. And if you don't appoint judges on a timely basis, you can't get through the court system. And that's literally what's happening today. We have a lot of vacant seats sitting open. And when you measure where we are today versus where we were under George W. Bush, they far exceeded the number of judges approved by now under the Bush administration. But because of the current use of the filibuster, we really are falling short. So it's bad for our judicial branch as well.
Yeah, the last time I checked, there were 125 executive nominations open, that are still pending, and 48 judicial nominations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think elections matter, and I think that this election, certainly as one of the most important in my lifetime, will really be immeasurable about whether you want people who want to get things done. Not to be overtly political, but I think so many of those who got elected in 2010, these Tea Party members, they all ran on this issue of jobs, on what are we doing for the economy. But back to an earlier statement, they've really focused on reproductive health. Overwhelmingly, they've been focused on access to contraception, undermining Planned Parenthood, defunding Title X, an enormous agenda that has nothing to do with job creation and really harms at-risk women, young children, at-risk families. And so I feel that there will be accountability in this election cycle. And I'm hopeful that voters will really turn out to hold these elected leaders accountable based on what did you run on, what did you do, did you accomplish what you set out to do, and why not? Because unfortunately, a lot of the members of the House have just said, even the leaders have said, we're done legislating. They're done. They're done for the year. They're not going to do anything else between now and November. I think that's unacceptable. We passed an important transportation bill in the Senate. We just got that done. We passed an important farm bill in the Senate. We're still waiting to get that done. But we could do easy things like reform tax policy for small businesses, doing an infrastructure bank, getting our roads, bridges, sewers, high-speed rail, rural broadband, a new electric grid, doing Made in America. Anytime you create a Made in America manufacturing job, you can get a tax credit. Those are so common sense. They're not Republican or Democratic ideas. They're just good ideas. And if you can't move simple legislation like that, then Congress really is broken. And I hope there's a lot of accountability in this election towards people who will do nothing.
Well, the highway bill was finally approved right before the recess, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That was a bill that the Chamber of Commerce, which is one of the biggest Republican lobbying group in the country, was strongly behind.
Yes.
Why did it not go through? Why did it just languish for like 9 months?
I think it had a lot to do with the Tea Party politics in the House of Representatives. It passed very highly out of the Senate. So Ranking Member Inhofe and Barbara Boxer are to the chair and the ranking chair. If you know anything about these two individuals, they're probably on the edges of the political spectrum. But they at least came together to get that bill done. So it is possible. There are people who want to do things, but there are many who don't. And that's why I believe elections have consequences. And I really hope, to the extent we can get more voters voting, get more Gen Y, younger people voting, so that their voices are heard, we could do more in terms of accountability with elections all across the country.
I have in my memory seen Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan and Bob Dole, and also when Bill Clinton was president, with those leaders sitting down and signing bills and that were important for the country, and it was accepted as a bipartisan effort of Congress doing its job, what it was elected to do, passing important pieces of legislation that affect the country. That doesn't seem to exist right now. There is no civility, there is no cooperation. Why? You said it's political, but why? What's the political advantage for members of Congress to present themselves that way to the voters and to the public?
Well, I think many leaders have stated this very clearly. Their number one objective is to make sure President Obama loses his re-election, and that's sad. And so if your goal is to shut the economy down, make sure we have no economic growth, you're not going to want to pass an infrastructure bank. You're not going to want to pass a small business bill. You're not going to want to pass a manufacturing bill. You're not going to want to even pass a transportation bill. And so unfortunately, when things become overly political, everything's about the next election as opposed to what's best for the country and what's best for the people you represent. And I really think that's what's at the heart of it. Doing nothing stifles growth. And so doing nothing is the number one priority, particularly in the House. And I've heard colleagues say, I have no intention of ever compromising. Compromise means they agree with me. And if you go into your job believing that, you will never be successful in passing bipartisan legislation, because you've got to find the commonality. And when we've been successful, it's because we find it. We find what we agree on, we build from there, and we have a give and take that ultimately makes the legislation stronger.
I want to just counter one thing that you said. There are Republicans, I mentioned Tom Coburn earlier, who places all these holds on the legislation, and he says he does it for one simple reason. He wants every expenditure, every appropriation bill debated and examined, and he ordered a GAO study of the stimulus package, and the GAO came back and said nobody's keeping track of where this money is being spent, and that there was nobody really in charge of determining it.
That's not true. There was a whole website devoted.
Well, he said that
there was a whole website divided to track every dollar.
More people keeping track, regulating catfish than there were determining how the stimulus money was actually being spent, and whether it was being spent properly.
And that goes to one of my overarching goals. We need more transparency in government. We need much more accountability. And I think it's important that we can create ways to make government more accountable and more transparent. Simple things, putting things online, putting our financial disclosures online, making sure the public can understand what bills and how we vote on them, putting cameras in the Supreme Court. I mean, there's so many different things we can do to make government more transparent and more accessible to everyday Americans. And I think all of those ideas should be pushed forward. And I agree with Senator Coburn. We need much more transparency and accountability on spending, and to know what's going into these bills and where the spending's happening. But that doesn't mean he should stop all progress on bills in the Senate. And if those holds concerned judicial nominees, that doesn't go to his concern about expenditures. So there's got to be a balance, and I think it's right to have the oversight and accountability, but we also want to move forward on important bills that can help our economy grow.
I mean, there are a lot of serious problems facing the country right now, and after this election, it will have to decide what happens to the Bush tax cuts. How are you going to cut $1.3 trillion from the federal budget? And if it's not done, some very unpleasant things will happen. Why haven't these issues been dealt with in the last year? Why have they been left until after this election, where we're going to be facing another 11th hour crisis on these huge issues that affect the economy, affect employment? Why haven't these problems been solved in the last year?
Well, there's a number of reasons, and we'll take each problem separately because you've mixed a bunch. One of the big concerns we have is we have a significant deficit and a very high debt. And there's a goal by many of us in Congress to reduce spending by about $4 trillion over 10 years. That is what economists have estimated would really put us on a better footing to move our economy forward and to create more stability long term. And so to do that, there's been a number of proposals about how to do that. The first one was the Debt Commission that Simpson Bowles, they came out with a set of proposals and priorities, but the way that was set up is it needed X number of votes to move forward and didn't get the right number of votes. That was a missed opportunity in my view, largely because setting it up as a vote requirement, it would have been better, I think, if it just went straight to the president accepts or rejects and then pushes his party to support it, but that was missed. We then had another opportunity with the Gang of Six trying to come up with their own proposal, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, moderates, and liberals coming together to say, what is our best proposal? That never got presented because Coburn withdrew his support at the last minute. The third opportunity was a major vote we had last year, which basically said, it was called the Budget Control Act, and they said, we're going to set up a budget for the next year about how we're going to spend this money and how we're going to cut spending. And what it required was, it gave the super committee the opportunity to come up with a grand bargain themselves, but if they failed, you would have an immediate cut off the top of the $1.3 trillion that you're talking about, sequestration, about half from defense and about half from discretionary spending. The discretionary spending cuts come out of firefighters and police officers and Homeland Security and things we really don't want to cut. Defense comes just a fat hatchet across the board, not with any subtlety and not with any regard to national defense. And so that failed. The super committee failed. Now, one of the reasons why super committee and Gang 6 failed is there's an unwillingness by, unfortunately, too many Republicans who gave their voting to Grover Norquist, literally by saying, I will sign a pledge to Grover Norquist that I will never raise taxes. So even though a lot of these proposals included tax reform, closing out all loopholes, closing out all deductions in exchange for lower corporate tax rates, that still didn't satisfy Grover Norquist's pledge, and so they would withdraw their support. But we have some interesting developments. Senator Coburn wrote an editorial in the New York Times recently where he said, I think we have the momentum and the ability to actually take this on now, and I think there's enough Republicans who will no longer feel beholden to Grover Norquist. So that's been our biggest impediment, because every time there's been a deal, to be able to cut spending by $4 trillion, about $1 trillion is going to come from revenues, some form of tax reform. And with that pledge in place, we couldn't get Republican support for it, period. So there's some opportunities coming up. Depending on how the elections go, we may be able to do this grand bargain in the lame duck. If President Obama wins and is our president, I think he will bring parties together to actually do that work. Because there's many, many proposals about how to do the discretionary spending cuts. There's many proposals about how to do the entitlement reform, but it's been the tax piece that has held us up every single time. And so I'm optimistic that if the president does win re-election, he will take this on. Now, there's an enormous leverage opportunity coming up at the end of the year. It's when the Bush tax cuts expire. They go from 36% to 39% for all income levels. That's an opportunity because nobody wants to be responsible for the highest tax raise ever. And so many people are going to be eager to keep those tax rates lower for some Americans. The Democrats are eager to make sure middle-class Americans keep the lower tax rate because they want them to have those funds to provide for their families, invest in the economy. So, because that's going to expire, that's a leverage point. Maybe the president can use that opportunity in time as a way to bring people together and say, we can preserve lower rates in exchange for the grand bargain, and that's possible. If it doesn't happen, rates will go up, we'll go back to the drawing board and say, well, now you can be responsible for the largest tax cut in history. Why don't you tell us what you're willing to do, and we'll see which rates we can lower. So I think this is going to be debated continually from now till either by the end of the year or into the new year.
And what do you think is likely to happen? I mean, you mentioned the largest tax, the Norquist pledge.
I'm hopeful.
I read something that said that if the Republicans allowed the tax cut to go into effect, which they don't believe is actually a tax cut because it was sort of a temporary trial program, then they can pass a tax cut.
Yes. So that would be after the election, yes. That would still be
higher than the tax rates, that would be lower than the Bush tax rates, but higher than they are now. That's what you're talking about.
Yes. So that could happen in the new year if they can't do the grand bargain in the lame duck. I'm hopeful we do the grand bargain in the lame duck. I really would love to do a full tax package before the end of the year.
Why do you think that the chances are any better now? I mean, you cited...
I think the leverage of tax rates increasing...
But why now? Why do you think it'll work now when there was no progress made during the whole
Well, at some point,
supercommittee?
people have to be responsible for the country and our economy. And with the crisis in Europe, with the capital markets continuing to contract, with risks to inflation, people are going to want to do the right thing, I believe. And I think more governors will get engaged, more American people will get engaged, they will demand more from their elected leaders, and I think democracy will work. So I'm hopeful that as we see these pressure points beginning to converge at the end of the year, that will create an opportunity for not only greater awareness of really the dilemma we're in, but also an opportunity for not only decision making, but for consensus building.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Republicans say to me, and one of the main criticisms that they've made about President Obama, is just, why doesn't he do something about spending? Okay, I get it that the Republicans don't want to raise taxes. Mm-hmm. We still have way too much spending, and I think everybody agrees, way too much government spending. You've got the Medicare situation, and you have Social Security, which need to be addressed. Why do you think that the White House, why hasn't the president and why tried to at least make some inroads there on his own to just say we need to do this?
Correct. We did do some reform in the healthcare debate. In healthcare reform, we did take an enormous look at how we can reform Medicare, getting duplication out, increasing transparency, increasing healthcare IT, doing less fee-for-service, more continuum of care as a way to reduce spending. And we were able to reform Medicare substantially and receive many, many hundreds of billions of dollars of savings over the next 20 years.
Projected savings.
Correct.
And
because
these are
of those
mostly
reforms.
Advisory committees, those, right?
No,
these are groups that are studying
No, there's reforms
procedures
in terms
that are not necessary or unsuccessful. Or
No, there were reforms specifically for areas where spending was not necessarily going to the patient, that was going more to overhead and not to health care. Also, programs that were too generous, covering health club memberships, things like that. Those were reformed and it became more streamlined. And so they did achieve real savings. We've also been doing a number of spending cuts in every area of spending. So for example, when you do the Farm Bill, you will decide on spending for agriculture for the next 5 years, transportation bill, all of it. So when we just did the Farm Bill, we cut tens of billions of dollars out of spending in this year's Farm Bill from the last one 5 years ago. And those were real reforms where we consolidated programs, made things streamlined. We used to give farmers direct commodity payments to stay as farmers, whether they grew crops or not. We eliminated that entirely in this Farm Bill. Now a farmer can apply for insurance instead. So that was reformed. So real reforms on how we're spending our money in that, and we do it with every single title of appropriations, and we've been doing it. So we are cutting spending, and a lot of these proposals have more spending. It's just that when you do it in such a unrefined way, as sequestration is aiming to do, it will cut things we wouldn't choose to cut, like national security.
They were almost like poison pills, right?
Yes.
The automatic cuts are things that neither side wanted to make.
Correct.
I think most people here would be surprised to learn, I know I was, that the Senate works 3 days a week, generally.
Senators do not work 3 days a week, I can assure you. You have to go to your state and have constituent meetings. Something like this is a work day for me. This is not a play day. Mm-hmm. If it was a play day, I'd be with my kids. But what we try to do is provide time to go to your state, to do constituent services, to meet with your constituents. Every senator will set their own schedule. I post my official meetings online, back to the transparency issue, because I want to know if I'm meeting with some constituency group, I want the opposing group to know, so if they want a meeting, they can ask for one too. That kind of transparency, I think, helps bring better government. But the goal of having you be for votes, it's typically 4 days a week. We start on Monday evening, we go to Thursday or Friday, and then when you want to go back to your state, you'll go on the weekend.
Right,
but you have both responsibilities. You have a responsibility to go to hearings and to vote, and you have a responsibility to meet with your constituents, and you have to do both, and one cannot be done in Washington.
I agree that you generally work very long hours, that you're always on the move. This is an election year, mm-hmm. and you are, and I've been told and have observed that many of these constituent and the visits back home are to raise money and to campaign. What I'm talking about is the days that are spent in Washington. There is what is called the bed check vote, right, where you come in and there's a quorum call on Monday night, which says that you're here.
We usually have one vote on Monday night, 1 or 2 or 3. But the House is very different than the Senate. Our schedule's pretty routine. We go from Monday, and Friday's up in the air. We'll know by Friday if we're there or not. The House is different. They might only spend 3 days.
Right.
So I don't know. You could look it up.
And also...
See, I just know when I was in the House, Speaker Pelosi wanted to change that. One thing Speaker Pelosi said is, I want House members here 5 days a week, because she wanted to start the oversight and accountability over the Bush administration that she felt was really lacking, and she wanted time for committees to actually meet. So when I was in the House, and Congresswoman Harman's here too, she knows, but we were there Monday through Friday. That's what we tried to do. Under this speaker, he's changed the rules, and they're there for a week, home for a week, there for a week, home for a week. But it's just a different schedule, and every speaker will set their own agenda differently based on what was important to them. But Speaker Pelosi, I know her #1 goal was, I want more hearings, I want more accountability, I want Congress to do their job. And so that was what I was under as a House member. The Senate seems pretty standard. It's Monday through Friday. Fridays are up in the air.
Friday is like, let's get out of here if we can.
Yeah.
Conversations I've had with senators over the last 6 months, so many of them say that we don't do anything anymore. We don't debate, we don't vote. We go to quorum calls. We vote if we need to approve a new post office or the naming of a post office. But most of the stuff now, bills don't, and there are committee, there are committee meetings, but generally, and this goes back to the way things used to be when you had Howard Baker and Robert Byrd in the Senate. There were, bills were considered in committee. They came to the floor. They were debated.
Well, there's no question.
And they were voted on. But the debating and the voting on doesn't seem to happen anymore.
There's no question Washington is broken, and the Senate's broken, the House is broken. It's not working as it's intended to be working. And that is clear. It's clear to every New Yorker. It's clear to every American. And I think you need to change leaders. I think you need to have elections. I think we need to shake up the rules. I think we need much more transparency and accountability. I think we need to get the money out of politics. All of that has to change. That's what's necessary to create a vibrant democracy where you're debating and voting and having full accountability. It's absolutely necessary. And you need reformers in Washington who want to do this, who think it's important to do this. And without that, we will not be successful. And back to my initial point, I think the way we will get there is electing more women to Congress, because I believe that women will be more consensus-oriented and will want to get things done. It's what we do in our households, in our families. But it's a generational change, and it's going to be very difficult, because I can tell you, if there's any young woman in this audience, you asked her, do you want to run for Congress someday? She will tell you, why would I ever do that? Why would I put my family through that? Why would I put my kids through that? I don't have time for that. I would never want to be in that industry.
It's not just women.
Yeah, it's most people. It's most people. But women, more often than not, will not go into the industry because it's so aggressive and it's so negative, and they hate the way campaigns are run today. And what we're leaving is not all of our best and brightest will ever even aspire to public service. So I think we need a transformational, generational change. We should have, public service for every high school graduate, every college graduate, to give these young kids a chance to know how valuable it is to help someone. That your whole job in life is to help someone else, but not yourself. And when they have that small measure, you get that small measure of opportunity as a young kid, and you see what it means to build a house for a family that's homeless, or you see what it means to help a hungry veteran who can't even feed himself by serving at that soup kitchen, you are going to remember that that is more important to do than get that high-paying job on Wall Street. And so that's what I think has to happen. It has to be a commitment to the next generation to say, public service matters. You personally can make a difference. Your voice is the difference between winning and losing an election or winning and losing on an issue. And if we don't do that, then we will continue to have the same dysfunctional government that we have today, with not the best and brightest leading our country. And that's what has to happen.
You mentioned leadership. In the conversation that I've had with Evan Bayh, and from what I've read about from Olympia Snow's resignation letter, they both talked about leadership. They feel, and I always thought that some of this was always true, but Senator Bayh said that he was denied a seat on the Finance Committee because he only voted with the Republicans 90% of the time. And as you said, Olympia Snow was sent to Siberia for disagreeing with the leadership. Now, it used to be, and the country used to function, by people crossing party lines on a regular basis for issues that were important to their particular constituencies, and to, but that is not, apparently, I'm told, not happening anymore. That you have to toe the party line. That is the most important thing.
Well, you need people with backbones. You need people who will stand up for the people they serve before anything else, and be able to be independent of their parties. And that's what we had in Olympia Snow. We have it in a number of the women senators, and we have it in some of the men senators too. I mean, I can work on a bipartisan basis with Orrin Hatch on cybersecurity. I can work with Lindsey Graham on national security issues. I can work with Mark Kirk on issues to protect Israel. We have alliances, and we have people who will work on a bipartisan basis. And I can tell you, when we're successful, it's because we find that commonality. And I'll just give you one example. So when I was asked to work on the 9/11 health bill, it was really given to me with a bit of a wink saying, good luck, your job is to minimize the damage this will cause to your career when you fail, because there's no one who wants to help these first responders. And it had languished for a long time in the House and had no progress in the Senate. But when I looked at the bill, I said, this is not about New York. As so many people said, we're not going to send billions of dollars to New York. I said, this is about who we are as a country. These are men and women who literally raced up those towers when everyone was coming down, who lost their lives because of their courage. And these are the men and women who literally were the ones who were on that pile every day, first looking for survivors, then looking for remains, and then doing the awful cleanup, all the while breathing in these toxins that are now killing them. And so when I started to look at this issue, I thought, what is the commonality we all share here? Well, we all stand by those who answer the call of duty. That is an American value, Democratic and Republican. And these were first responders. They came to Washington. They knocked on every door. They did not let one senator or congressperson rest. Some of them were also very ill at the time, but still, week after week, coming to D.C. to do this. And over time, we created a conversation about standing by those who answer the call to duty, because these men and women came from every state, every district in the country. And so there wasn't a jurisdiction or a House member or a senator who didn't have a first responder who answered this call. And it was Lisa Murkowski who said to me, Kirsten, I'm going to bat for you every week and talking about why aren't we standing with firefighters? Republicans like firefighters and police officers. Why are we abandoning them at their time of need? And it was Susan Collins and Olympia Snow saying, Kirsten, just change the way you're paid for it. And if it's a tax, they won't go for it. But if it's not a tax, if it's something else, then they won't have an excuse. And then when we're getting closer and closer to the end of the session, they said, Kirsten, you've got the votes. You don't know. They will not be able to vote against you. And we had a lot of other things happening. We had, great coverage in all of the news media. We had MSNBC, CNN. We had Jon Stewart spend 2 whole episodes of his show focused on the first responders. And then we had Fox News. And one thing that's true in politics, if you have Jon Stewart and Fox News on your side, you will be successful. There's no political cover anywhere. And so we came together and we passed that bill unanimously. And so I don't think there's anything that can't be done. You just need the right people to do it, who are willing to go, behind lines, behind both sides of the aisle, and say this is the right thing to do.
I want to open this up to some questions. I have one follow-up I want to ask you about the leadership. How are the leaders in the Senate chosen? How did Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid get to be the 2 most important people in the Senate?
I wasn't there.
You weren't there.
I don't. But I can tell you something about Harry Reid. Let me just tell you about Majority Leader Reid. One thing I admire so much about Senator Reid is he does have a backbone of steel. I can tell you there were many times when many urged him not to have a vote on repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But he had promised me and others who are working on that legislation, I promise you we will have a vote. And the first time we had a vote on it, we lost. Party lines, lost. And we thought if it was attached to the Armed Services Authorization, that how could Republicans vote against the authorization for the armed services? But they did, because it was before there was any vote on taxes, and they all made a pledge, if you don't vote on taxes, we won't vote for anything. But I went back to Harry Reid, and so did my colleagues, and they said, Harry, we only asked for 1 vote, but we really need a 2nd vote. And he said, I'm with you. I believe in this. And he held it, and we won. And so for anything you want to say negatively about leadership, I can tell you.
I didn't mean that to be a negative.
Yeah.
You said the negative thing about leadership.
No, I just said I didn't know.
I'm completely
I said I didn't know.
unbiased in the subject, but
anyway,
I do want to know.
But Harry Reid is somebody who, you're in a foxhole, you want him with you, because he does not go back on his word. And I think probably the reason why he is where he is he knows his colleagues very, very well. He knows what's important to them. And I think in Congress's past, he was able to really bring people together based on knowing them well and what's important to their states and their priorities. And he's a quiet leader, but he is a resolved leader, and he's one that is very, very strong.
This is a vote by the caucuses. They select the leader, right?
Yep.
I asked him, I said, Harry, how did you get this job? Senator Reid, how did you get this job? And he says, I don't know. I'm just not the kind of a guy that's going to pose much of a threat to anybody, and I'm pretty good with the rules. Somebody said that the rules are the most important thing, that you need somebody that the reason these 2 people are there is because they know every trick that's ever been pulled in the Senate. Is that an accurate description, you think?
Harry knows the rules.
Okay.
So the question I have, if we're ever going to allow drilling in our state, 2 things for me personally need to be satisfied. 1, I want to know from the gas companies, what is the formula, concentration, and chemicals being used in the fracking process? Have full disclosure of that, and have a full analysis of whether any studies have been done about the health effects of those chemicals, so that we as Americans, we as New Yorkers, can feel satisfied that nothing going into the ground is harmful to our health. Because we unfortunately have the largest Superfund site in America, in the Hudson River, because of PCBs. We didn't know 100 years ago that PCBs caused cancer or were horrible for our health. But because of that, 100 years ago, PCBs were used generally as a fire retardant in transformers. It was a chemical used in many uses. And so unfortunately we have historical pollution, and now we're trying to clean up the Hudson. Well, if you happen to live on the Hudson and you get your drinking water from the Hudson, imagine how horrible it is for you to have to ask the question, well, how many PCBs is too many for my drinking water? How many PCBs is too many for my bath for my baby? I mean, you don't want to ask those questions, and those questions have to be asked. So you want to avoid contaminating our drinking water. Second question that I want satisfied is, as you do drill down deeply, naturally occurring elements are brought back up in the water, including radium. So if you're bringing up radioactive water, you just have to know how to treat it to be able to clean it before you put back into any system. And so I'd want to be satisfied on that issue. So those are the 2 issues that I think we can ask for clarity on, get full information. If we're satisfied on them, then we can move forward. But I would really urge all of our leaders to know that you're satisfied on those two issues first, because we do not want to destroy our pristine drinking water. It would be very expensive, far more expensive than the value of the natural gas if you had to treat all our water and clean it up and be able to filter it.
I want to ask you a follow-up about the renewable alternative energy. This was a big part of President Obama's presidential campaign 4 years ago, and quite a lot of money was invested in it with very, I won't say mixed results, because there was very, very little positive benefit. This was supposed to be an engine to create jobs. And what we found out from the experiment was that you can build solar panels, but the Chinese are going to undercut your prices. And as long as, and you had companies that took money and then moved operations to China, you could make the argument that it created more jobs in China than it did in the United States. It's been a dry hole in terms of creating jobs. It needs massive amounts of subsidies. I think everybody agrees that it's a wonderful idea, but is it really practical, and and what should the U.S. be doing in that area?
Well, China certainly thinks it's practical, because they are eating our lunch in a lot of the development of next generation alternative fuels. And what really this is, I think, it's the greatest market opportunity of our generation. And it baffles me that we will not create an energy policy that focuses on how we transition from the abundance of natural occurring fuel sources that we have that are carbon-based to these renewable sources. Because it's, number one, a national security issue. To have to be beholden to Middle Eastern countries for our oil and gas supply is unacceptable. Second, it's a huge economic opportunity. We invented solar, we invented fuel cell, we invented wind power, but because we haven't kept the manufacturing based in the U.S., China, who is now taking the manufacturing, is better poised to do the next generation innovation to forming these types of energy sources in a more cost-efficient way. And so what we should be doing is taking back that opportunity by doing the research and development, by doing the manufacturing in the U.S., and frankly, we do it very well in New York State. Some of our producers are some of the best, the leading researchers and developers in alternative fuels. General Electric is one of the most sophisticated researchers on wind energy. We have companies all across New York that are at the cutting edge of fuel cell and fuel power. We've had hydropower for a century in our state. We're at the forefront of that. We have so much opportunity because of our agricultural assets to do biofuels, to use farm waste, to use willow. All these different non-food-based sources could be the source for cellulosic ethanol. That is a huge market opportunity for our farmers and for those in rural America. It would be a huge boon for New York State, and New York State really is the cutting edge of a lot of these alternative energies, uses for the military specifically, and uses for products. So I hope that when we do finally pass an energy bill in the Congress, we will have a long-term view. Use our domestic resources, because we're going to have at least 20 years of transition where we do have to have domestically produced fuels. We have to have an all-of-the-above strategy, but you must invest in the renewables because it's such a market opportunity, and frankly, that's the future for America and the future for our national security. And as a senator from New York, where we've had 14 terror attempts since 9/11, I can tell you, we do not want to be beholden to the Middle East for our oil supply. We must take control of our national security priorities, and energy is going to be part of that.
But none of this makes any economic sense right now without government support. You're saying that we should continue to support it.
We should support it. The rest of the world does. Do you think China doesn't subsidize its manufacturing? It throws money at its manufacturers. It's hard to compete with them because of all their subsidies. So we should be competing. And when we do, we will be successful. We have the minds. We have the entrepreneurs. We have the innovators. We are the greatest scientists in the world. We should be developing all that technology here and spending the time and money. When John F. Kennedy said, I want to put a man on the moon, he said, I'm going to do it in the next 10 years, not because it's easy, but because because it's hard, because it's going to be a measure of our competitiveness, our success, and who we are as Americans, we should have the same exact view on energy, and so that we are going to invent it, we are going to build it, we are going to be the market leader, not because it's easy, but because it's hard, because it's something that is going to show how strong America is and what this future should look like. That is the policy that I want to see coming out of our country.
On that aspirational note, I'd like to thank both Kirsten and Steve so much for this wonderful conversation.